from the CyberHub bunker and studio. You're tuning in to the CyberHub podcast, Tech Corner. And now, join me in welcoming your host and CISO, James Azar.
Hey folks, welcome to another Tech Corner for the month of January 2021. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today's show is going to be a lot different. But before we do that, a big shout out to our sponsors, Know4 and Wistic, for supporting our podcast. Without their support, this podcast would not be possible. Check them out. They are linked below. And Wistic has a great tool for your SolarWinds supply chain analytics. It's going to be awesome. You're going to want to check it out. Joining me today are two very known faces who I hang out with on LinkedIn like all the time. And we're going to talk about cyber burnout on today's show. Dr. Dan Schaefer. Hey, Dr. Dan, how you doing?
Good. Very brief introduction. I'm a business and sports psychology. I help people avoid really costly error. I do that by selling them mistakes.
I love it. And the super recruiter, my sister from another mister, the one, the only, Renee Small. Renee, welcome to my podcast.
I'm on the other side.
It's your opening performance. I typically join your show. Today you're joining mine, and I'm so excited because for once I get to play host.
You get to play host. I love it. I'm excited to be here. Renee Small, cybersecurity super recruiter, helping awesome leaders hire great talent. And I am super duper excited to be here with you, James. As you said, you are always on the other side. So I get to answer the questions this time.
You do. You get to answer all the questions this time. I get to ask them, which is, by the way, a job much harder than people think. Like, I don't think people understand how difficult it is to ask questions.
Not only that, and manage the chat and do all the other stuff that you see me doing behind the scenes. So it could be fun. I can relax.
Indeed. You can sit back and relax. So we're going to talk about cyber burnout. I want to say one thing, though. Renee and I and Dr. Dan, we do this weekly podcast on LinkedIn at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time every Thursday on Renee Small's LinkedIn page. Also on mine, I always share it. And in December, my big mouth got us in a little bit of trouble, and now we're trying to bail ourselves out of it with the challenge I kind of put out, which is the InfoSec hires. Let's help 10 people beat the ATS system and get hired through just shares on LinkedIn, right? So where they couldn't get noticed before in an ATS system, through LinkedIn, they would get noticed. We've got 6 people down as of this morning. We're recording this. It's Tuesday, January 19th. So it's very exciting. 6 people that have gotten hired. One of them through my video idea, which, by the way, works. If only
works.
It does.
Works.
Great idea.
It's an awesome idea, and I'm so happy that she did it. And I mean, she just jumped all over that, James. You put it out there, like 5 minutes later, she posted it.
And she like, I think it was like the next day, I think Saturday, she texted me. I remember I was at Target with my wife, and I get her message and I start screaming. I'm like, yeah. In like the middle of the aisle at Target, right? And my wife looks at me and she goes, she's like wondering what just happened.
What's going on?
And I'm like, someone got a job from an idea I threw out. And I go, lives are changing because of the way we do this stuff. And I think that's really important. I think
that means so much to that person. It's almost hard. It's almost incalculable what it means to the person to get that job.
It is. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about cyber burnout. Okay. So I want to bring this out, and today's episode is about cyber burnout for a reason. I'm getting a lot of messages. I'm hearing from a lot of people. Burnout is real. And let me recap. Let me set the stage of where we're at burnout. And Dr. Dan, I'm going to pass this to you for a little bit of analytics and what can people do. And Renee and I are going to, we're going to chime in here. But 10 months ago, last year, January 19th, if we go to January 19th, 2020, we're all just hanging out. We're all going to work, going to restaurants, hugging, kissing, visiting, meetings, you name it. And lo and behold, about a month and a half later, we are dealing with a global pandemic that's locked people home. And yes, it brought some unemployment, but predominantly in the cyberspace, it brought growth. I mean, cyber was one of the only industries where we saw job growth during the pandemic and stock growth during the pandemic. Some of the best performing companies in 2020 were cybersecurity companies. And that's excellent. That's great. But here's what it brought with it. People working from home. So there's no more disconnect, right? The idea of getting up in the morning, eating breakfast, showering, saying bye to your family, getting in your car, going to work. The time in your car could be your me time. Listen to music, listen to a podcast, preferably mine, either, CyberHub podcast, CISO Talk, or breaking into cybersecurity, with Renee and Chris, which is an awesome podcast for those who haven't listened to it. And I get to work. I'm unwinded from my home life. I go to work. I deal with all the stress of the job, finish my day, get back in my car, me time again. I get to unwind, whatever my commute is, get home, family time, kids go to sleep, spend some time with the wife, go to bed, wake up, routine. All of that got just completely demolished, right, with COVID. People were working from home. Kids aren't at school. Kids are home. Your wife's at home. And now you've got no me time. You don't have it. It doesn't exist. And now here we are 10 months later, and the burnout is real because your workday never stopped, right? When I worked in an office, when everyone worked in an office, we had a pause. 6 o'clock came through, 5 o'clock came through. You put everything down, you walk outside, go home. Working from home, though, that doesn't really exist. And now we're seeing that burnout. So what can people do, Dr. Dan, to really start dealing with this burnout? What are some of the stuff you've seen in terms of burnout, of doing the same thing over and over again for a long period of time, and people just really losing that passion, losing that focus, and losing that drive?
That's a great question. I think one of the things we've talked about is the importance of asking the right questions to the right people. I think that the people who are, I would wonder if you ask an individual, because most often I work with individuals, I say, what's getting in your way? What's holding you back? What's going on in your life? Or what do you need to have happen right now that's not happening? I don't know whether the management stress that's put on people by not being able to physically see the people that they manage is impacting on them. I know that one of the issues we had when I did some work with Hewlett-Packard before the merge was people who had to manage remote teams. Now you're not going to see the guy in the office. What kind of stress does that put on you? What has to change in your way of dealing with people? And can you do things the same way you always did it? Well, no, you can't do it the same way. There need to be some new strategies that are devised very, very quickly by people who are at the top of their game, who are in cybersecurity, working on it, operating with their A game and having to manage people who are around them. So it looks back at once again, it's individual. I mean, I have a client who held a springboard diving championship in New York for 4 years. I said to him, John, what's the difference between springboard diving and business? He ran a bank. He says, no difference. He says, my dives are always the same. He said, the water is always different. So this is a different environment, and it's how quickly can you pivot and become adaptable? And then my question is, what gets in the way of your adaptability? If I bring it back to sports, I look a lot at how people talk to themselves. We talked before we started about people who have direct reports, and they have 10, 12 direct reports. HP only had you 7 people report to you. And then if you spread them all over the place, it's looking individually at what's the situation that they're dealing with, and how can you give people who are in those positions tools to deal effectively with what you already know is going on.
So let's talk about that for a second, because the idea of really people, the idea of people really kind of comprehending what's happening from a work from home and the tools was, even though some jobs were remote before COVID, right? And I think there's a different level of stress being cyber security, simply because the cyber role is an extremely mentally challenging role, right? I mean,
I've said to Renee, in all the time I've been dealing with cybersecurity people, my image of them is some guy or woman sitting under Niagara Falls, because it never stops. So there is no, even when you got in the car to drive home, or when you were driving into work, you know that you were still under Niagara Falls. You might be able to separate yourself from the environment, but it's understanding where you are and finding ways to deal with your mind game, because this is basically an individual's mind game. How are they dealing with it? I've spoken to Renee about people who said, well, we never did things this way, or it's not the way we do things in this field. Well, that's got to change. Now, the question is, how does it change? The biggest challenge that we had in helping people to move into a coaching culture was for the person who was going to be the coach to identify what they did well, because it is impossible for you to teach somebody something that you don't know that you know.
So, Renee, let me ask you this.
Yep.
You as a recruiter obviously deal with a multitude of people, right? You deal with hiring managers and HR people who could be on the burnout stage. And sometimes you're dealing with great candidates who show you all the signs of burnout. How does that, what do you see?
Well, I wanted to add that one of the things that I saw immediately was, especially in security, as you know, many of us were already working from home. The difference was the additional people that are home now. So even the ones, so when you, for example, James, you were going into the office and you had your me time, someone like me, I was driving my kids to school and I still had my me time. Like, my husband was at work. So even though I was remote, which is similar to a lot of security professionals that were remote, you still kind of got that me time, either because everyone else was leaving. Immediately, very, very quickly, the folks who, there were a couple different things that I saw. You had people who, are constantly distracted. I mean, I have Dan on speed dial. Like, Dan, help me. So I have Dan on speed dial specifically because of that. I have little ones, 9, 6, and 3. Husband is home. Everybody immediately got here. And at a point in time, to James's point, from my perspective, because being a recruiter, having even more business and even more work come in due to the pandemic. So being able to manage all of that was a challenge for me. And then what I saw with candidates and hiring managers, it's like I was almost talking them off the ledge, because some of the HR folks are remote, but a lot were in the office. So everyone's kind of shifting and changing and trying to find their new normal. And I think you just saw it a lot. You saw some of the things that I saw on LinkedIn that made me laugh were people that had on the shorts, like up top was a shirt or whatever, and then below was the sweatpants and the shorts, and really embracing this whole, hey, this is a completely new normal. We are burning out, getting the emails and stuff at all hours of the night, people not taking that break, and getting to that point of you can't focus anymore. Like, you get to a point, and I think this happens with everyone, where you just stop, like you can't continue, and people were still trying to continue. The work never ended. So I did see that. I saw it from hiring managers. I saw it from, I experienced it myself and saw it from the recruits. An additional challenge, I think, with looking for opportunities right now was the complete change in even the interview process, everything being on camera, everything being on Zoom, people not fully understanding what they looked like, how to operate, how to react, how to just be on camera. And that in and of itself was a huge change for folks. So I saw that as another, heightened, when you think about people being nervous on interviews, they're just automatically nervous and you can't even see yourself. So imagine you're giving these answers and you're looking in a camera, and so again, it's just an additional layer of things that were not common or normal or standard pre-March of last year.
It comes back to people preparing to compete. James, when you talk about somebody doing a video, they just can't get on and talk off the top of their head about the video. They have to prepare what they're going to say, the language they're going to use, and who they're going to be talking to. So it's giving people, the whole focus that we have is giving people tools that are going to help them win. And also the mentality of preparing to compete. Where is the preparation to compete? Who are they competing with? What's happening? Can you anticipate the challenges that are coming down the pike? Renee and I talked yesterday about somebody just saying, where do you see yourself in 2026? Every one of my clients is in 2026 working backwards. But we work backwards in 2026. There's a dream. What do you dream 2026 being? And when you look backwards, what gets in your way? What can possibly derail you? And the biggest derailer is the way people talk to themselves.
I think just one more piece about the hiring process in particular. People have, looking for a job in and of itself is typically stressful, especially when you don't have one. So actively looking for opportunities. And I've seen many, many posts on LinkedIn where people are saying, I'm quitting this whole field. Looking for a job is ridiculous, especially in the entry level space. And so seeing that burnout as well, seeing people put in, 300-400 applications and applicant tracking system and just completely get burned out from it. Like, it's so depressing to continuously try to put yourself out there and apply to jobs and not get any kind of response. Or when you do, you don't get the job and things like that. So that was another thing that I saw and I continue to see, hence, our InfoSec hires, which is great because we're getting people out, kind of switching it up and getting people out of applying to applicant tracking system, just applying to jobs. Clearly that's not working, but getting themselves out there more and us sharing with our networks more. So that is definitely another place where I saw a lot of burnout and continue to see it.
Yeah, I think the biggest burnout, I'll share kind of a personal story as a CISO, which is you're under a magnifying glass that's, remember a little kid with a magnifying glass chasing an ant, trying to burn an ant with the rays of the sun? You're a CISO, you're almost that. You're an ant. And you're an ant laboring, and you're trying really, really hard, and you're trying to do everything you possibly can. I'm blessed. I'm in an organization where I have a lot of pull, and I report directly to the CEO and to the board. I don't have a lot of the challenges that many of my colleagues have. But at the same time, I have a lot more responsibility because of that. And I think that's one of the challenges is with CISOs is we burn out very, very fast. I mean, an average CISO holds a role, Dr. Dan. I don't know if you knew this or not, but it's 18 months. 18 months is the average CISO lifespan in an organization.
I didn't realize it. Sounds like an NFL player.
Yeah.
I look at it as a contract role all the time.
It is that because it's things are constantly changing, and being a CISO is not only managing, and I like what you say, and I'm trying in the times we've interacted when you say plan for 2026. So I've kind of tried to start to do that, right? But here's where the challenge.
James, remember what Yoda says. Yoda says, you don't try, you do it. But the point is, it's not planning for 2026, it's dreaming 2026. Because your subconscious mind will drag you toward it.
So I dream towards, if I dream towards a 2026, I dream of a completely different world, and maybe I'm not even a CISO at that point. Okay. Right, but it's a completely different. There's a challenge that exists for CISOs, which is beyond just managing, and beyond securing, and beyond relationships, and that's education. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for the CISO role. A CISO role, if you don't have passion for security, you won't last long. because you're constantly learning. So I not only have to worry and learn about new security and new, tools and techniques and procedures that my adversaries are trying to use in order to impact my organization, I also have to learn new technology constantly and get to the idea where I know more than just a bullet, a bullet point of 5G or a bullet point of quantum computing. I had to study quantum computing. And study it to the point where I reached out to experts and professors in universities and spoken to them, did books, using my podcast as a platform, invited a bunch of people on here to understand quantum computing, because I realized that in 2026, that's what I'm going to be securing and that's what I'm going to be up against. Right. So how do you deal with, in your experience, Dr. Dan, how did you see all these things come together, dealing with the education challenge, the managerials, all these different things, on top of all of those normal things? Hey, no big deal, but we've got a global pandemic that's killed over 1 million people that we know of, in the world today.
I find it in talking to people about what they do, and I think that the big issue is what do they really do? What's their role? What are they selling to somebody? I think in some ways, and I'll use an example that I've used frequently. You're like a bottle of Advil and a prescription for Ambien. When a company hires you, and if you're talking to them, you shake the bottle and you go, chick, 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 chick. You don't have any headaches and you sleep at night. But it's how to do that. What I look at is most people look at a situation and they ask, what's going on? What's happening? I look at it differently. I say, what's missing? What's not happening? How do I identify what ingredient is not working in that situation? So, and it just seems that the people that I have, my clients and people I work with, have that kind of a thought process. What's not happening?
Renee, when you look at kind of what's happening and what's not happening from a hiring perspective and from a burnout perspective, what are some of what do you tell people who are looking for work who are burnt out? What are some of those things that you kind of try to kind of recognize? Because you obviously make your money as a recruiter if someone stays in the role. So sending someone who's burned out to do a job may not be financially beneficial to you.
Right.
So how do you deal with burnout?
So, what I tell folks is to first, we really dig into what excites them. To your point, James, if a person is just going for a job in security, it's not going to work because you will get burnt out very, very quickly. You need to be passionate. And what does that mean? And what are you looking for? And I use what Dan says a lot. Like I ask people, what are you looking at? What do you want to do next? Where do you see yourself in 2026? Like all of those types of questions, because I want to make sure that when they are being submitted or being presented to certain opportunities, that it aligns to really where they want to be and where they want to go. So we always look at, it's always futuristic. It's always looking forward. So James, when you talked about quantum computing and all those various things, those are the kinds of the exact questions to get people out of their heads so they know what to look forward to. I ask and I have awesome conversations with a lot of leaders or CISOs and other folks, security architects and the people who I connect with, and ask them, what do you want to do next? What's next in your career? Forget what you're doing now. What do you want to do next? What's your dream, opportunity? What are some companies that you would love to work for and why? And it gets them completely out of the here and now. And it gets them into what they're really passionate about. Like, I would love to work at, a startup. I'm in this big, stiff, staid company and it's kind of dry and boring. And I think I want to switch gears and do something completely different. Or I want to tap into the healthcare industry because they need my help. So getting inside, almost getting out of your own head as a candidate is really, really helpful with burnout, because then you are dreaming. You're talking about what Dan is talking. Dan is saying we're looking into 2026 and letting 2026 drag us to it. And so that's the same thing when I say James, what do you want to do? And you say, oh, I'm going to be this, this, and this. It's completely different than what you're dealing with right now. So that's one of the key ways that I get people to not be concerned with the current burnout, because right now, obviously we're in right now, but in 2026, we'll be in a completely different place, hopefully, a better place. And thinking about where, a person would be then is so much more exciting than like what's happening right now.
When we talk about, when I have somebody that's in a transition period and just like a 90-day get used to your job, the first thing I ask them for is give me an organizational chart. And they say, why? Here's my job. I said, I want you to point on this chart where you want to be 2 or 3 years from now in this company. Where do you see yourself? And I say, well, why do I do that? Well, because your subconscious mind must act out every thought, image, or idea you put into it. And it will do it without any effort on your part. You don't have to think about it. It'll drag you toward it. My job, my business is making sure people don't get in their own way when that happens. And so it's how to take, when we've talked about this, why things happen slowly. Slow today isn't working for people anymore. They're under a tremendous amount of pressure. And so it's giving them some tools to think differently about what's going on.
Brilliant. So I kind of want to take this conversation from the burnout stage to the recovery stage, right? And with some real, I guess, a few practical best practices that people can really engage in from a burnout perspective. Renee, I'll start with Dr. Dane. Is it okay if we start with Renee? What are some of Renee's tips for
I'm going to give you everything that Dr. Dan told me to do.
We've been working together for about 15, 18 years. Oh.
What's your burnout recovery kind of deal? Give us one tip that you use, Renee, to avoid burnout.
Yeah, this is straight from Dan. So you got a tag team. You have us right here. But he talks about, he asked me about the distractions. He asked me about what, it's almost this, every time it's the same. Dan, I feel like I should be working for you at this point. It's about the distraction, what distracts you, what makes you stressed out. So when I, personal story, when I'm freaking out, when I have kids knocking at my door, like right now, and Dan is saying, what distracts you, or if I have projects that need to get completed, and on deadline and things like that. And he's like, what distracts you? When do you get distracted? So not only what happens, when it happens, and kind of getting to the source versus just thinking about like the stress level. And I think that is really important for people to really, break it down into pieces. So I'm distracted, I'm freaking out. Why? And then he goes back, takes steps back from there. Well, this is happening or that's happening. Okay, if I give a kid a chicken nugget or something, then they'll calm down. And then I get back to what I need to get back to. So really looking at the source of what makes you stressed out or distracted, I think is definitely key. And Dan could jump all over this because he's the person who's been teaching me this for all these years.
Well, I come back to, the 40-second play clock in football, as I work with the quarterback, who was one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. And, when a play doesn't go well, the tendency is to beat yourself up about it. But in 40 seconds, you don't have the time to do that. So you have to identify the challenge you're dealing with and move it to another time to deal with it separately. I mean, I tell my clients now, who are particularly athletes in college, that you need my permission to beat yourself up. Let me know when you're beating yourself up, and we'll talk about it. But the point is I have some other strategies that my athletes have used that really control their mind game dramatically so that they can relax just like that when they need to. And I was giving people tools to bring yourself back into the present, which is wild. And the other thing about this is very interesting. We've talked about the security of this information that we give out. I don't have to worry about that because my clients never talk about me. When I give them a competitive edge strategy or something that helps them focus or concentrate or do better, they don't talk to anybody about it.
Dan,
What?
Tell them about the worry. What people should do when they're worried.
Oh yeah, people who worry. So one of the major there are a lot of distractions that we could talk about, but one of the major distractions is worry. I worry all the time. I say, okay, what I'd like you to do is pick a time a day, say from 5 to 5:15, that you are going to do absolutely nothing but worry. At 5 o'clock, you're going to go sit in the corner and you're going to worry about something. So if you wake up at 9 o'clock in the morning and you start to worry, you go 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock. Your subconscious mind will allow you to put that worry off until 5 o'clock. And you keep moving it and moving it, moving it, moving it. And what happens but the key here is at 5 o'clock, you better show up in a corner. Because other than that, your subconscious mind won't play that game with you. So we would take a time in the evening after a major football game and say, between 7 and 7:15, you got to do nothing but review the plays that you really thought sucked. And that's all. But these are ways to deal with, and it's really looking, I would say to you, James, tell me what here's James saying to James, when James overhears James talking to James.
If I was going to say anything I don't think you want to be part of that conversation. I think it's R-rated significantly. But it's, it's, I love that. And I'll tell you, one of the things I always tell myself, and you kind of always have to remind yourself, is you're supposed to not know everything. And if you ask me, what conversation are you constantly telling yourself? And I like your 40-second game clock idea. Sorry, I'm going all over the place, but I'll tell you this. Love your 40-second game clock idea. Short-term memory. Remember your failure. Reset the clock. 40 seconds. Wipe it off. Get rid of it. Get back in the game. Pick yourself back up. Keep going forward. You'll have an opportunity to look at that mistake in a little bit. But for right now, just focus on continuing to go forward. What I tell myself, if I could, if I'm talking to myself, and what I tell myself is, you don't know everything, so just listen more. I constantly have to remind myself to listen more, and that I don't know everything, even though sometimes I'd like to think I do.
Don't we all?
I cuss at myself constantly. Like I am constantly, I have a very high sense of accountability to myself. So if I make a mistake, or if I go down a path that I shouldn't have gone down under, I think I'm tougher at myself than anyone else, than anyone else can be to me. I'm very critical. And when I'm talking to myself, I'm fighting the battle of, you're not good enough, to where you know where you need to go, just trust your instincts. And that's my inner battle, is the kind of, the devil on one side going, you're not good enough, you're never going to do it. And my good side going, my angel on this shoulder going, like, you're fine, just trust your instincts. You know where you're going. You've trained this, you've done this before. You know what you need to do, just stay focused.
Well, that comes, the way that we deal with that is negative self-talk. When you hear that chatter, it goes on and on and on and on and on, it's contaminating. It's trash talk. And trash talk works really best on yourself because it's in your voice. So, but if you want to stop it instantly, just push your tongue up to the roof of your mouth and it stops. I use it in my hobby. Yes. So the fact is my question to you is, how long do you want to listen to this stuff going on and on? And can you afford that time? Can you afford beating yourself up? So maybe it's picking a point in time in a day to just review this stuff. The other thing that happens with the 40-second play clock is that when a play doesn't go well, my quarterback would stop for a second, close his eyes, and watch that play complete exactly the way he wanted it, and then come back into the huddle. Because that to me is a business deal. You have to put a business deal together. You have to manage your team. You have to manage the people around you in 40 seconds. So yeah, and it's competition. I mean, I know we talked to somebody who said, well, on one of Renee's calls, and a woman called me. She said, it sounds like you're very competitive. I don't compete. I don't like competition. I said, well, I could never hire you as a cybersecurity person if you didn't realize you were competing against the people who are trying to penetrate our company.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge with security, right? You've got to be, we've got to be correct 100% of the time. We have zero chance
Right.
for mistakes. Our adversaries, they've only got to be right once to take down everything we work on. It's almost the story of the three pigs and the wolf, right? You're building a different house, and he comes and he blows at it and it falls apart. The second house, and then the third one, maybe they don't do it. Only in our story, the wolf still succeeds on the third one, because what he can't blow, he'll just push his way through the window and get in. And then you go to a fourth house and you put cages on the windows, he'll find a way through the roof. And no matter what you do, the wolf always finds a way in and gets the piggies. And that's an example I use all the time.
I think that's such a great example, because the folks that, especially the leaders like you, James, and the CISOs, and when you all are talking to your business lines and your constituents and making them aware. I used to hear people say, "Oh, I just don't want to get hacked. Can you hire me somebody who will make sure that we don't get hacked?" that was like a real question, and it's so bizarre. So again, the three little pigs. Or I say to someone, "Do you think you can never be robbed? Someone can never break into your house." Like, you can have a dog and a gate and ADT and all these different things, but if they actually truly want to get in, they will get in. So
yeah,
to have someone, to not, I think it's just so much when it comes to communication, and to make people the awareness, like what you're doing right now with this podcast, just making leaders who are not in security aware of what you all do every day.
I think
that's just so important.
So the beauty of this podcast is I get to announce our Cyber Couch idea. And so the Cyber Couch is going to be a thing next month in February. A Friday afternoon kind of a private Zoom meeting. You got to apply to attend, and you can, and no recording of any sorts. And you just get to explain and kind of share what you're going through, almost like AA and rehab, but for people in cyber and not for rehab, just to be able to maintain. Because, I brought this up in one of our podcasts, but I said, cybersecurity folks, there's been diagnosed cases of people with PTSD from cybersecurity because of the trauma that goes through with people working in cyber and reacting to a breach. And reacting to a breach is extremely, extremely stressful from all levels, from the CISO down to the analyst and across the business. Think of the people who may consider themselves expandable in the company, going, well, if the company is losing a bunch of money, maybe my role is gone. And there's aspects of a cybersecurity breach that aren't really being discussed today, but should be, because the impact of it is not only to the security team, it's across the entire organization, down to their families, to the customers, to the vendors, to the suppliers. I mean, everyone's impacted by a breach at a different level, right? Mm-hmm. And that's often not discussed, but it should be. And it should be discussed more and more and more, because the human element of cyber is very, very real. And the burnout is so real. The people I've seen great people burn out and just leave and go do something else.
Which is, we can't afford that right now.
Right. But it's the same, by the way. I mean, I've made a claim, and one of the things that I talk about with burnout is it's no different than being a police officer. If you're a police officer patrolling the same neighborhood that's filled with crime and drugs and poverty and all these things, you're going to burn out. And that burnout, the way it's going to come out in aggression towards the people you're dealing with, right? So you've got to take police officers out of that. The whole idea of rotating police officers and not letting them work long shifts and giving them, training days and days off and mental health days and all these things. The things that we need to do in order to positively reform police is stuff that we need to do in security as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because that's the only way we're retained.
A lot of that pressure is unrecognized, and people say, well, it's just part of the job, but it's not. The impact is tremendous.
Yeah, this whole concept of it's part of the job. When you're a football player and you're making, $12 million a year playing football for 4 months in front of the TV, and you're under a lot of stress, and when a team folds in a Super Bowl, right? They go, how could they fold under a Super Bowl? And you hear people say, well, it's part of the job. Yeah, but you're kind of paid to perform. If you didn't, show up to the game, there's an argument being made, that maybe you shouldn't, be paid or even stay on the team. But in every position that's a high stress position, like cybersecurity or law enforcement or in the military or being a CEO of a big company, right? There's a lot of pressure in those roles and in those decision making, and it requires people to kind of understand that you go home with this and you carry this weight, and it does have very significant impacts.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead, Renee.
When the question comes up about what keeps you up at night, that's one of those questions that all CISOs typically get. And it's a question that Dan and I ask people. It really is. Dan, what was the comment that the guy said? I sleep like a baby and I wake up every 2 hours.
I sleep. What keeps you up at night? Nothing. He said, I sleep like a baby. I'm up every 2 hours crying.
It's the same concept.
The other thing about the sports piece is that, when you see a football game and somebody gets knocked down, they don't stay down. They get right back up again. And that's the competitive nature of what's happening. And so how do you get somebody to get back up again? And look at this. The other issue that's come up is that I don't know where the role plays out within a company, but I've dealt with people on football teams who are quarterback whose team did not make an investment in an offensive line to protect him. That's a dramatic message. If somebody is leading a CIO or a CISO who doesn't have the support of the people around him, either because they don't understand what they're going through, they don't understand what the dynamics are, and they don't understand the value of the person they're dealing with. I mean, you can't let a CISO get sacked.
Right.
Yeah, well, CISOs get sacked all the time, unfortunately, and that's part of the broken culture within organizations today around security, and it's something that it's something that I know I constantly talk about. Is you can't sack a CISO for, if he's brought you, 5 quiet years and one event after 5 quiet years. You don't sack Bill Belichick for one losing season.
No.
Right.
Yep. But that's a mentality.
And it's a broken mentality. Yeah, absolutely. Guys, and we're almost out of time. So I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it. Renee, Dr. Dan, for sharing so much. And I hope for our audience, they got to learn a lot from this conversation about burnout, because it's real and it's serious and it has impacts downstream. I think there was the kind of my parting words is a survey I saw said that 70% of cybersecurity people medicate in one way or another, whether it's through drugs or alcohol. And so live a healthy life, find a different way to deal with it, from working out to just speaking to someone like Dr. Dan can all help you.
I'll throw one thing out. Every one of my athletes, professional or student athletes and people, use a hybrid hypnosis strategy over Zoom to be able to relax and focus instantly. So it's having a tool to do that. Maybe, James, at some point in time, we want to talk about that on a program.
Maybe on the Cyber Couch program.
Maybe on the Cyber Couch, yes. The Cyber Couch, So for those that want to be part of Cyber Couch, you'll need to DM me privately in LinkedIn. I do need to verify who's getting the invites to the Cyber Couch, because it is kind of people are going to come and they're going to talk about the stuff that's really on their minds and their hearts. And so, yeah, we just don't want to have people in there that are going to record the sessions or whatnot. That's critical. It'll be a private Zoom link that I'll be sending to participants. We'll talk about it more on Thursday.
Good.
On Renee's Breaking into Cybersecurity CISO Thursdays, which if you haven't seen, you should. For those that have missed this week's CISO Talk, you should go back, listen to it. Richard Rushing, the CISO over at Motorola Mobility, 30 years of experience. He's one of the CISOs I know. He's been in his role, I think, now for almost 20 years with Motorola. So a lot to learn from a man who's been in the same position for over a decade. And that's it for our podcast this Friday, folks. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Get some rest. Don't let yourself get burnt out. Take some me time. Right, Dr. Dan? Very important me time.
Lots of me time.
Do lots of me time. And we'll be back on Monday with our practitioner brief live at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you want to tune into that live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. Until then, folks, it's James Hazer signing off. Thank you to Renee. Thank you to Dr. Dan. And stay cyber safe.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.